What is your small town dark secret story? I don't know if it's considered a dark secret, but in the county I lived in from ages 10 to 18, we had a soldier die under some extremely questionable circumstances. They said he was high drunk, experiencing mental distress, and raided a nursery, the plant kind. They claimed he was attacked by wasps and ran. He called 911 several times and claimed that someone was chasing him and was trying to kidnap him. In the last 911 call, he said everything was fine suddenly, just 14 to 15 minutes later. He was struck by a woman who stopped and called 911. He was ran over 2 more times and died. The autopsy showed no signs of bee or wasp stings. The connection to the nursery is due to the fact that it was just up the road from where he died. The place was ransacked, pizza eaten, money taken, but his wallet and phone were sitting on the counter, undisturbed. However, the family was not okay with that explanation, especially because he had previously texted that there were some problems with the local boys since the soldier wasn't from this part of the state. So the family had a private investigator look into it. They analyzed the 911 recordings and found several instances of other people talking in the background, though most of it couldn't be made out, except one. In the 911 call where he told the operator that everything was fine, a male voice could be heard saying, "Tell her." And the nursery? There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints that lead back to the soldier, even though his phone and wallet were there in the building. A lot of people, his family included, think he was killed by some of the local guys there after they got into a fight about something. They chased him down and caught him. He was able to run again after the final 911 call and was hit by a driver while trying to get help, and the police in the county covered the entire thing up because the boys involved were connected to the department somehow. Of the 3 drivers, none were charged for hitting yet running over him. I think only the first driver stopped, but it was discovered that one of the other drivers was connected to the department either through family or friendship. It's a crazy story, but you can look it up. Just search Austin McGo. I wouldn't be too surprised since there is a lot of shady stuff happening in small-town police departments, including covering up rapes that officers commit. I really hope his family gets him justice. He was from my town. Austin McGeo was a good kid. His family did not get the justice they deserved. They absolutely did not. It popped up again on my local news station a bit ago, and I'm glad they're still bringing it up. I hope someone will come forward with more information, and the family can get justice. A freshman with Asperger's was being abused by his family at home. He was a problem child and got in trouble on purpose, but no one went too hard on him because of his home life. He was a well-loved kid at school and in the community. One day, just before holiday break in December, he was really sick, but his mom sent him to school anyway. Locked him out of the house. He decided to try and get into one of the empty houses down the street, through the chimney. Now this kid was the size of a 2nd grader, but he was too big to fit through since chimneys taper down thinner. Mom never answered her phone when the school reported him missing. Went a whole day without reporting her kid missing. No one knew what happened to him. It was about a month and a half before we knew what happened to him. We all thought he ran away, was alive somewhere, maybe went to his sister's house. Nope. Dead in a chimney. The schools organized an entire week of counseling and such. They wore pink for a day and hangled out little pink ribbons on pins for him, since his favorite color was pink. Everyone was hit really hard by it. That's how our small town started 2020. It hasn't gotten any better, as you can see. Port Clinton, Ohio? If so, I'm around half an hour from there. I remember the night he was found, watching the news we all hoped, but kind of knew. Absolutely heartbreaking. This reminds me of a crazy story I read. A woman, a doctor no less, was scorned by her ex-boyfriend. She decided to try to break into his home and had the brilliant idea to go down the chimney. I guess a lot of people don't realize it narrows, like the unfortunate boy in above post. she got stuck and died. We had a crazy rich guy from the 1600s to 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so decided that when he died, he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune, and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones, and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral, going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. Wait, if the barn was locked, how did the key wind up in his coffin? Or if the key was in his coffin, how the barn end up locked? I'm glad the house went on to earn its dental certification, and if those ne'er-do-wells hadn't stolen his bones, his heir surely have been returning his belongings. A man can't properly resurrect without his bones. Weird that the woman at the Aldi's was literally the post above this one, and I have been scrolling for a solid 20 minutes before I saw your story. Crazy how things works. This was around 15 years ago, but there was a sheriff's deputy that was seemingly a really cool guy. Friendly, cracked a lot of great jokes, etc. He was working at the local high school as a school resource officer and was apparently almost universally well regarded. It turns out that he repeatedly raped a 14-year-old. He told the boy that he'd kill his parents if he reported the officer. I don't remember all the details, but I believe this went on for weeks or months before it was found out, and the officer was arrested and eventually went to prison. From what I have heard about prisoners, if it's two things they really hate, it's child molesters and cops. I wouldn't be surprised if they have to keep him either isolated or under constant monitoring. This is more comical than dark. A house burned down in this small town of 600 population, 1 block from the fire station. It being a volunteer fire department, nobody was at the station. They tried to get the pumper truck out, but one of the volunteers had run it into a brick building the week before and it was still at the shop. We're still undecided whether the house owner burned it down for the insurance. Strange that there was nothing valuable inside. Another story of the same town. Somebody showed up several years ago and started asking about the old cemetery. He was researching genealogies. The locals thought, hey, what happened to the old cemetery? Turns out, the current owner of the land didn't want that perfectly good and fertilized ground going to waste, so he dug up the headstones, piled them behind his barn, and put in a crop of corn instead. So people started talking about throwing him in jail, and eventually the county cops started looking for evidence. However, the pile of tombstones had disappeared, and the county judge was a relative of the corn grower, so nothing eventually happened. Edit. Yes, it should have been a slam-dunk case of desecration, but the old surveys were so inaccurate that nobody could prove in a court of law that the cemetery had actually been where we all knew it was. At least, that was the story. 15 years ago, the local district attorney called his longtime girlfriend and told her he was taking the day off from work and that he loved her. He parked his car in town and went for a stroll past the local shops. He hasn't been seen since. His car was found where he had parked it the next day. He had left his cell phone in the car, but his keys and wallet were missing. Later that year, his laptop, sans its hard drive, was found under a bridge at a nearby river. The hard drive was eventually discovered by a local woman walking along the bank of the river, but it was too damaged to recover any data from. Interestingly, investigators discovered that someone had done a search on his home computer for how to wreck a hard drive. Did he jump from a local bridge? Did he encounter someone whom he had prosecuted who did him harm? Or did he escape his life to start a new one? Given the search, I'm guessing either suicide or leaving to start a new life. Probably having something to do with something incriminating or embarrassing on that hard drive. Yeah, I think the general consensus is that homicide is the least likely option. I mean, someone who had a grudge against him would have had to have been in just the right place at the right time to come across him, unless they had been surveilling him. There's been questions raised about his involvement in the squashing of criminal charges against Jerry Sandusky years before he was actually charged, and if it was related to his disappearance. I don't know too much about that part of the situation, but I don't think they ever found a possible link between the two. Interestingly, the DA's brother committed suicide several years before the DA went missing, and Ray, the DA, was convinced it wasn't really a suicide. Life is stranger than fiction sometimes. About 10 years ago, a lot of homeless people disappeared, and when the police did the investigation, they found out a guy was kidnapping and eating those people. Police found his hideout and found a half-eaten body and bones from another person. People don't like to talk about it, but everyone knows what happened. What the fuck? Where did this happen, and are there any news articles on this? I'm sure they are, but they are all in Spanish. This happened in a rural area in Guatemala. Oh, I have a doozy. Short version. Popular kids in high school run a secret towel fight club and accidentally kill one of their friends in the house of a local politician, who proceeds to bury the story. Towel fight club. Tape towels over your hands and beat each other up. It's supposed to be just boxing, but it sounds like they got out of control and hardly could call it that. This is a sad one to me. There was an older couple here who ran a halfway house for troubled kids who'd recently gotten out of juvie. They fostered a few as well. They were loved in the community, wonderful people. One of them had an older brother who was a gangbanger in the nearest big city. During a visit, he snuck his 15-year-old younger bro a handgun. Younger bro ended up holding up a local gas station and killed 3 people. One of them was my friend's cousin. The foster parents lost whatever credentials they needed to do what they did. The kids went back into the system, and the giant house has been abandoned since around 2009. Saddens me that one awful occurrence ruined it for the many kids that could have been helped in the following years. I get why. I understand. It's just super sad. The couple were pretty old for foster parents, but their house was badass. A kid's dream. I know this because me and my friends stupidly snuck in as teens when it was abandoned. There was a legit basketball court in their giant garage. They also clearly let the kids decorate their rooms however they wanted. There were big video game character murals and stuff in the bedrooms. There's a half-submerged submarine from the war in the bay where I live. You can walk out to it when the tide is out. In the late 80s, somebody cut open the hatch, one of the only visible parts left sticking out the sand, climbed in and was having a look around. The tide came in and he drowned. If I remember rightly, the whole hatch was filled with cement, then welded shut to stop it happening again. The town I was raised in wasn't exactly small, but here's the one dark secret I know. My hometown was where lots and lots of sports players had their mansions. And so, of course, their wives and children were out and about in the community a lot. Every single sports player wife in that town is heavily addicted to opioids. Every single one. Opioid addiction is obviously an epidemic all over the country, but among the rich wives in the town, it had a 100% infection rate, so to speak. I know because one of my friend's mom was the hairdresser for basically every single one of those wives. I was homeless my senior year of high school, and one of the sports player wives heard about me from her, and she gifted me an iPhone. That phone was pennies to her, but I still wish I'd expressed my thanks more, because that wife died of an overdose not long after. Sorry if that wasn't much of a dark secret, but yeah. About 30 years ago, a local 8-year-old girl went missing during the annual carnival downtown. After a few days, they found a suspect that was seen near the girl right before she went missing. The guy confessed to her horrific murder and rape and torture. He was the kid's next-door neighbor and friend to the kid's dad. I'll spare the details, but it was really bad. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years or so. After 8 years, he was paroled and returned to the same house with his parents. Right next door, laws were a bit different then, to the family of the girl and former friend. About a week later, the man never showed up at his parole office. His parents filed a missing persons report. Rumor has it that several friends of the victim's father took care of him. If you talk to them, they just say that they are sure that he won't be back. How the fuck do you get parole in 8 years for abducting, raping, and murdering a child? Something similar happened in my town. Guy owned a bar across the street from his house, where he lived with his wife, daughter, and granddaughter of 5. He had a contractor working on the house. Grandma, who took care of the child during the day, thought it would be no big deal leaving the child sleeping while she went quickly to the market. Next thing is the grandpa sees the contractor running to his car and leaving the house. Curious, he went home to find out what happened, only to find his granddaughter crying with blood between her legs. After the grandmother came back, he left the child with her, went back to the bar, got his gun, and threw the keys to one of his regulars, asking him to close the bar because he had to kill someone. When he arrived at the contractor's home, he wasn't there. He then spent the next 2 weeks surveying his home 24/7, until the rapist probably thought the cost was clear and returns home. Grandpa sees him, breaks the door, kills the guy in front of his parents, then leaves, going directly to the precinct, where he surrenders his gun and makes a full confession detailing everything. He was tried for premeditated murder. Prosecution had all the evidence, testimony from his friends and parents of the rapist, the murder weapon, his confession. It was a close and shut case. Jury voted 7-0 not guilty. In Brazil, there's 7 jurors, and you only need a majority to convict, and not unanimous like the US. Back in the 80s, a couple were driving a motorcycle when they were stopped by 3 men, who then raped the woman while forcing her husband to watch. Then they killed both. The police caught them not so long after. The same night that they were caught, a mob of 300+ people gathered in front of the police department, broke in and told the sheriff, "You guys did an excellent job, now leave it to us." The mob broke the cell where the 3 men were, beated them up, and attached them, alive, into cars, and dragged them for 4 miles until a park in the middle of the city, where they set them on fire, alive, while everybody was clapping and cheering. Almost nobody talks about it now. Lynching, a Brazilian classic. Didn't knew the South people had it in then though. You learn something every day. The mayor of the town I live just outside was murdered by his girlfriend a little while back, and there was a realtor that was using his company as a front for smuggling drugs. Other than that, it's the usual small southern town crap. That reminds me of another small town where a local doctor was operating a pill mill. He got caught, and his wife murdered him because she was afraid of getting caught up in the fallout. Yet, now she's in prison for life. We have a vineyard hill next to our village. On that hill, there's a big wooden cross. Lots of people go there to drink, have a walk, or with their dogs, but almost nobody knows why the cross is here. During war, a vineyard keeper lived there with his son. His son was recruited, and the man was left alone. When war ended, his son survived and wanted to prank his dad by sneaking on him at night. But the vineyard keeper saw him and thought he was a robber, so he grabbed his rifle and shot the robber. When he found out it was his son, it broke his heart. He dug a grave on top of the hill for his son and erected a big wooden cross next to the grave. When he was done, he laid next to his son and shot himself. From that day, no one worked on the vineyards, and there's a big wooden cross on top of the hill. Now, you can't even recognize there's a grave. Some high school football players shoved broomsticks up freshman players' asses in the locker room after a practice. The coach found out and did nothing about it. The whole town knew, and nothing happened to anyone in the form of punishment every game. For the rest of the year, Opposing teams' fans brought broomsticks to games. What the hell? I'm from a small town in New Mexico, and we had damn near the exact same thing happen at a football training camp. I thought for sure you were talking about us until you mentioned Northern Illinois. Opposing teams still sometimes bring broomsticks to our games. At least in our case, something happened. It became a big story, even got on CNN, and the perpetrators went to prison. Edit. This is a bigger problem than I thought. Apparently, there's a lot of communities with school athletes that sodomize their teammates. This is not what I wanted to learn today. About 40% of my hometown was homeless. No one had jobs. No one could afford any kind of housing situation. Neighbors paid for heat where they could on houses people were squatting in, and everyone invited everyone else over for dinner. We didn't know who was homeless. We just did it. We hired anyone and everyone for odd jobs. A lot of people just lived as they would when they were kids. Keep the fireplace going with trees you chopped down, gathered water by the well, and traded, farmed and trapped for food. I went to school with a lot of homeless kids. We had, looking back, the most robust school breakfast program I've ever heard of. I thought it was normal for over half the school to show up until I moved to the city. You just gave people the dignity they deserved. No one was shamed if they dropped out at grade 10. We all knew that if they needed the job, they should take it. Looking back, I realize how wild it is. Our town was so poor, and no one was treated any different, by me and mine at least. Sure, there were some rich people, but they overwhelmingly went to the other school, and there were no panhandlers, no beggars, nothing like that. I was just told the Buseys were coming over for dinner. Did I like them? No. I kind of think they were dicks. But never did I make them feel uncomfortable, and most just ate, had some tea, and left. And if that doesn't tickle your fancy, a whale washed up on shore one week, and all the guys in the local high school took turns having s*** with it. All of them. Edit. To clarify, the whale part happened after I graduated by a few years. It was a very public thing when it was happening, and no one likes to talk about it since.